Crimes against humanity by Israel against the civilian population in Gaza. Since 1967, Israel has been internationally recognized as being in occupation of Gaza. The Palestinian Authority is responsible for the administration of the Gaza Strip. Israel controls airspace, settlements, military zones, territorial waters, immigration, trade and tax policy. In 2006, Fatah and Hamas split, and Hamas took control of Gaza. Israel declared Gaza to be a hostile territory and commenced closing border crossings and restricting goods from being transported. This invoked several confrontations as tensions escalated. Pursuant to Article 7 of the Rome Statute, Israel is accused of crimes against humanity for murder, inhumane treatment, and persecution for atrocities committed between 8 October 2023 to 20 May 2024. In 2023, violence broke out between Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Israeli Defense Forces. On 9 May 2023, the IDF targeted residential areas alleged to house PIJ members. On 7 October 2023, Hamas and the PIJ launched between 2,500 to 5,000 rockets into Israel and released gunmen in Israeli territory. They also took hostages, which were predominantly Israelis, in Gaza. In response, Israel launched a counter-offensive targeting high-rise buildings, medical facilities, entire neighborhoods, schools, al-Shati and Jabali refugee camps, and seized supply of electricity and fuel. Israel regained control of the territory over a period of days. On 8 October 23, Israel stopped the water supply, and by 9 October 23, all food, water, electricity and fuel delivery was halted. Israel closed the Erez crossing and the Karam Shalom goods crossing. On 16 October 23, the European Union launched a humanitarian air bridge to bring supplies to the humanitarian organisation. By 18 October 23, Israel approved a passage for restricted humanitarian aid from Egypt to Gaza, provided it is inspected first and given to civilians only. Between 18 October 23 to 29 October 23, several convoys of humanitarian aid was allowed into the region. 23,000 litres of fuel was allowed to enter on 15 November 23, but Israel only allowed UNWRA trucks to utilise the fuel for the purposes of distributing aid. Hospital efforts were hampered by the lack of fuel, as they were unable to operate generators to run equipment. Israel occupies Gaza as it controls parts of Gaza's territory without consent, and the territorial state has lost effective control. As an occupying power, Israel is obliged to follow the conventions and customary international law to protect the occupied Palestinian people. Israel claims it is no longer the occupying power, as they withdrew forces in 2005. However, Israel controls the airspace, territorial waters, land crossings at borders, infrastructure, as well as key governmental functions. As such, Israel continues to be recognized internationally as being the occupying power. Under the conventions, Israel is obliged to accept the offer of services from the International Committee of the Red Cross. They carry out humanitarian functions while maintaining neutrality. The International Committee of the Red Cross are a neutral, impartial and independent humanitarian organisation who promote compliance with international law. The ICC prosecutor sought a ruling pursuant to Article 9.3 that the scope of the court's jurisdiction extends to this situation. Israel's position is that the ICC has no jurisdiction, as they are not the occupying power and they are not a party to the Rome Statute. The ICC interpreted the wording of Article 12 as a reference to a state who is a party to a Rome Statute. The ICC concluded that as the state of Palestine is a party to the Rome Statute, the ICC could exercise criminal jurisdiction. An investigation into Palestine was opened by the ICC prosecutor on 3 March 2021. Referrals from other states were received by the ICC prosecutor. The ICC was satisfied that international humanitarian law related to international armed conflict applied, as both Israel and Palestine are a party to the 1949 Geneva Conventions, and Israel is in occupation of Gaza. The ICC was also satisfied that jurisdiction also applied to the non-international armed conflict between Israel and Hamas. Given the seriousness of the crimes against humanity of murder, inhumane acts, and persecution, individual responsibility is attributed to leaders who afflict and authorize such atrocities. To attribute responsibility to individuals, they must have participated and had knowledge of the widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. It is enough to satisfy this element where the perpetrator had an intention to further the attack. On 21 November 24, the ICC made a finding that grounds exist that co-perpetrators Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant committed crimes against humanity of inhumane acts, murders and persecution. The conduct initiated by the Israeli leaders was intended to kill civilian people in a widespread systematic attack against the population. In contravention of the occupying state's obligations, Israel intentionally suppressed food, water, electricity, fuel and medical supplies from the civilian population, which created conditions not conducive with life. Israel failed to facilitate humanitarian aid in violation of international humanitarian law. When Israel relented under the guidance of the US, the humanitarian aid was conditional and insufficient for the population's needs. Unfortunately, this impacted on humanitarian organisations on the ground in Gaza who were unable to supply essential food and goods to the civilian population. By seizing the supply of electricity and fuel to Gaza, water availability was impacted and hospitals struggled to provide much needed medical care. Hospitals were denied anaesthetics and anaesthesia machines, forcing health staff to utilise unsafe methods, causing extreme pain on nearly 105,000 injured people. This only inflicted great suffering and serious injuries to both the body and mental health of the Palestinians. Israel were aware of the factual circumstances surrounding the suffering of the people. As a result, Palestinian civilians have suffered malnutrition, dehydration, and even death at the helm of the Israeli leaders, amounting to crimes against humanity of murder and crimes against humanity of other inhumane acts. This is contrary to Article 8 of the Geneva Conventions. The element of the crime against humanity of murder only requires one or more persons are killed. This is satisfied as close to 45,000 Palestinian people have died. The Israeli leaders committed and had intentions for widespread or a systematic attack on the civilian population. They are also accused of the crime against humanity of persecution for the severe denial of fundamental rights to life and health. The civilian population was targeted collectively based on political or national grounds. Israeli leaders denied these rights, and as such, individual responsibility has been attributed to them. All elements of the crime against humanity of persecution have been satisfied. In a monumental move, the ICC has issued arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for crimes against humanity committed against Palestinian people. A historical move which has only occurred once in 22 years. All 124 state parties to the Rome Statute have a legal obligation to arrest them should they try to seek refuge in any of those states. Once arrested, they'll be turned over to the ICC where they'll be incarcerated in The Hague. On 15 November 2023, the United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution calling for humanitarian ceasefire pauses and corridor through Gaza to facilitate goods and services. They called for unhindered access to impartial humanitarian organisations to supply them with water, electricity, food and medical supplies, and to undertake emergency repairs to essential infrastructure. The US is a close ally of Israel, and since 7 October 23, they provided Israel with approximately $17.9 billion in military aid. Pursuant to Article 25(3)(c) of the Rome Statute, US leaders could be charged with crimes of aiding and abetting in crimes against humanity. However, to date, no business leader has been charged for this before the ICC. A special committee to investigate Israeli practices in the occupied territories was also created. The US rejected the move to issue arrest warrants on Israeli officials. On 21 November 2024, the US threatened to invoke the American Service Members Protection Act, which allows the US military to use force to extradite any US or allied national detained by the ICC in The Hague. This presents a huge challenge to the ICC and circumvents the consequences issued by the ICC. The Bush administration forced 100 countries to sign bilateral immunity agreements, promising not to turn over US persons to the ICC. The US threatened to withdraw foreign aid and blackmailed states in weaker financial positions to sign the agreements. This undermines the system of international law, as it is dominated by large and powerful countries such as the US. If the US was to be charged with aiding and abetting, it would be as simple as seeking refuge in a country who is a signatory to the bilateral immunity agreement, as they will not be turned over to the ICC. In 2021, Donald Trump issued sanctions against ICC prosecutors with respect to their investigations of Israeli leaders and US officials relating to war crimes, which was subsequently reversed by Biden. Biden reiterated the US's strong disagreement with the ICC's actions related to Palestinian issues. Recently, US Senate leader John Thune introduced bipartisan legislation to sanction ICC prosecutors filing charges against Israeli officials. Such legislation limits the ICC's ability to act impartially and undermines the effective operation of international law. There are no international treaties relating to crimes against humanity. Currently, the law only applies during war times and not during peacetime. Crimes against humanity committed during peacetime then go unpunished, and the seriousness of the crime is not afforded the consequences available under international law. As there is no treaty, there is also no dedicated expert body focused on monitoring and enforcement of the rules regarding crimes against humanity. There are currently recommendations to states for a convention on the prevention and punishment of crimes against humanity. A treaty would allow a means to litigate crimes against humanity where states have failed in their obligations. Additionally, the Rome Statute is not ratified by all states and so is not applicable internationally unless, for example, there is a state in occupation, such as Israel. The Rome Statute does not address the prevention and punishment obligations for states. It provides for cooperation between the ICC and the state, but not between states. These issues undermine efforts of the ICC, and as such, serious consideration needs to be given by international leaders as to how these barriers can be removed.